everyone, and thanks for joining us for another edition of Behind the Map. Today, I'm chatting with Andy Skinner, a cartographic designer at Esri. Andy has spent 50 years as a cartographer in a career that started with black and white print maps and has evolved to online maps with thousands of colors. Prior to Esri, he was manager of cartographic design at Rand McNally, and before that, he was a senior cartographer at Geosystems and MapQuest. He is a renowned color expert who works on base maps and color ramps in his current role at Esri. Thanks so much for spending some time with us today, Andy. Can you give us an overview of your 50 plus years as a cartographer and how map making has changed and evolved?
Yeah, thank you, Robbie. It's changed. I started out working in black and white and in pen and ink. So you can imagine how much it has changed. I've gone through 3 or 4 technical revolutions, I suppose you could say, working initially with pen and ink, and then with some of the sort of scribing tools that we used to have for creating print maps. And then from there into using some of the early computer work using Adobe Illustrator and that sort of thing. And on to where we are now. I started out working at a college, what's now the University of Derby in England, as a cartographer, but also found myself working on a lot of information graphics. So that allowed me to expand things a little bit. I then got the chance to move over to the USA to work with a company in Pennsylvania, which became Geosystems and then became MapQuest. So I was in at the beginning. For those of you that don't know, MapQuest was Google before Google appeared. And there I was involved. I did a lot of work for people like Reader's Digest and National Geographic. And then in 2000, I got the chance to move across to Rand McNally, who at the time were probably the biggest cartographic company in the US. I was manager of cartographic design for them. So I was designing for a whole series of map products for them. And then 2009, I moved across to Esri, started out with what was the old mapping center, and then moved on to my role now, which is working with base maps and doing some side work with things like color ramps for ArcGIS Online.
That's fascinating. I mean, I really, the whole kind of side quest almost into information products and those kinds of graphics, I'm sure had some impacts on how your career progressed and kind of the way you thought about and approached these projects.
It's interesting. The early work that I did in black and white, I always feel really helped inform me with where I've ended up, because it taught me to think about maps tonally.
What do you mean by that?
Well, if you're working in a single color, then really what's going to differentiate the symbolization on the map is purely tone. There's nothing else working for you. And that gives you a very sort of focused idea of how maps work. And that, I think, has informed me as I've gone forward into the sort of color work that I've done since. I've learned to sort of think of the map in 2 levels, if you like, both tone and color.
That's really interesting. And that's actually exactly what I wanted to ask you about next. So you mentioned, you just talked about working with black and white maps and kind of how that's informed your approach. Now you're working with living online maps where you're using hex colors. So how have those innovations changed the way you approach the use of color in maps?
It's one of the things with working in print in the early days when it was manual, was that you really didn't have a full palette available for you, because you had to you were building screens manually. So you were working with maybe 5% differences in cyan, magenta, yellow as you were building colors. That left you to really, like I said about tone, it made you really focus carefully on how that information was coming together to work as a map. Once we moved to on screen, then suddenly we've got as many colors as we like. And, it's freeing in a way. So it gave me the opportunity to really work with color in a way that I'd never done before, but informed by what I'd done previously. And a lot of what I do is intuitive. I mean, people listening to this may hope that I've got some magic formula I can give them, which will help them to figure out color for a map. But it isn't. It's something that I've built up over the years as I've gone.
I mean, you mentioned that, the thousands of colors is freeing and gave you a lot more, creative license. But is there also a risk by having, or is there a drawback potentially to having all of those options at your disposal?
Oh, absolutely. One of the problems, you get carried away with it a little bit. You can really start and people around here will tell you that I've become known for finessing color, if you like, for making adjustments of a few percent to help them make their maps work a little better. And you can get very subtle with it. However, we're now moving into a world where accessibility is an issue, and suddenly that palette is having to be constrained to a certain extent because we're thinking about other things.
So, kind of building on that, why is color so kind of critical to map making? And how can color enhance or detract from a map?
In a way, it's dangerous to think too much about how it's adding to a map, I think, because that leaves you to focus too much on what's going on. I still hold to the fact that it's a combination of color, tone, and symbolization, which is going to create a map. And the color in that respect, it just becomes a tool. It's another tool that you're using. Now, you can create some fantastic maps, and the color is a large part of that. But it's not that sort of magic wand, which in itself is going to make the map work better. There's a lot more that needs to go into it than just the color.
I think that's a really good point. And I want to circle back to something you just mentioned earlier about accessibility. So thinking about color and accessibility, I know that you've worked on high contrast maps and other projects that really are designed to help make maps more accessible. Can you talk a little bit more about that, the relationship between color and accessibility, and how that helps people who may have some kind of visual impairment be able to experience maps?
It started out 10 years ago when I started working on some color ramps for RGS Online. We'd always said that color blindness in itself is something that we can try and work towards. But like I was saying, that sort of millions of colors that were available to me quite suddenly are not available anymore. Early on, it was frustrating. It was irritating. That great magic palette that I had to work with, I suddenly couldn't do it anymore. But then as you work with it, you learn what combinations work, what combinations don't. And now I'm in a position where it really doesn't bother me too much. It's the way I think. Now, part of my process is that I will work through a color, and I'll, not always, I should do it always, but I don't always, but I'll check it against some color blindness testers and make sure that everything is holding up. Generally these days, I find that I do, because I've learned what works.
What are some of the color blindness testers that you would recommend, or that you find useful in kind of your work?
There are a number available online. I mean, ArcGIS Pro has one built in. So I'd recommend that people use that if they're working in Pro. If you're working online, there's one called Color Oracle that I've used quite a bit. There's another one called, I've got to check on what the name of it is, Color Simulations, which I've used a lot these days. That one is a bit more sophisticated, but it doesn't cover as many sort of color issues as the Color Oracle one does. But there are plenty of others out there. I think the important thing is that you have some sort of testing environment to let you look at the map with 2 or 3 of the most common color blindness issues and make sure that everything is holding up okay. And like I say, as you work with it, as you get more experience, you'll find that you're making the right decisions anyway.
Yeah, it's almost, I'm guessing it almost becomes like muscle memory. The more you do it, the easier it becomes, and the more kind of, comfortable it becomes.
Beyond color, it becomes a trickier situation, because for a long time we said that the sort of base maps that I work on, for example, that have 40 or 50 separate layers of information that are going into the map, then you're trying to build contrast in for people that have got visual issues, and there's a limit to how much contrast you can build in. And for a long time, we said it can't be done. But then it reached a stage, particularly as the federal government started to bring in legislation about accessibility, and we had to start thinking about how that affects maps. And so I did some work to see if I could come up with something that would work, which is what's now available in our base map suites as the enhanced contrast base map. It's not easy, though. There are things that you can and can't do to try and meet these problems. And it's a sort of moving issue anyway. No two people have the same visual issues. So there's a limit to how far you can go with them. But you need to do what you can.
So it sounds like one of the ways potentially beyond color to help make a map more accessible, and specifically a base map, is maybe to think really intentionally about what features you do and do not include in that, and kind of almost simplify or focus what the map is showing?
Absolutely. One of the things I've been doing recently is suggesting that doesn't mean that you take away the other information that's on the map. Once you've focused in on what's important on the map, then focus on that for getting the accessibility aspects right, but then leave some of the other information in there so that other people that are trying to read the map can get a little bit more context for it. And if you can think along those lines, I think it makes it a bit easier to try and figure out how you're going to create an accessible map, be it a base map or be it beyond that.
That's a really interesting thought. And really, I think it comes down to one of the core tenets of strong map making is know what you want to communicate. Like, have a sense of what the focus of the story is and make sure the map is centered on that. This has been fascinating. So I just have one more question for you. You did kind of allude to it earlier that there's not some magic formula, but considering that, do you have any advice or tips for either new cartographers or even experienced cartographers who want to improve their use of color? And what sort of lessons have you learned in your career?
Well, I'll go back to that black and white thing. If you've got time, I know that's a big if for a lot of people now, we're all under a lot of pressure, but if you've got time, I would say try building a map in black and white as a starting point. Grayscale, let's say, rather than black and white. Let's not be quite as... figure out what works for you there, and then apply the color after that and see where that takes you. Like I say, hopefully you'll find it very freeing when you actually move across to color to suddenly find out how much else you can do. But that's about the only thing I can say that might actually help people to develop a sense of how color works on maps. And then beyond that, like I say, is think of it not just in terms of the color or the hue, but think of it as the tone as well. It's as important in trying to build a hierarchy in maps, which is what we're always trying to do, then, concentrate on the two.
I think that is fantastic advice. Well, thank you so much for a great conversation today, Andy.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed it.
Thanks.